Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pit Stop number 4. Today, we're joined by Nuke again, and we're talking about narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves, and the trajectory of our life that we think we have to follow. Nuke, how you doing?
I'm great, sir. How are you?
Very good. Always a good day when we get to do one of these.
Always a pleasure, sir. I'm surprised you keep asking me to do these. So obviously,
Yeah,
obviously, our conversations are meaningful and impactful. So, amen.
of course. It's always my pleasure. So it's a little more selfish than you might believe.
Oh, okay then.
So like I said, today I wanted to talk to you about narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves in our mind, and kind of where they come from, and whether they're good or bad things, or a little bit of both.
Hmm.
And so, just when I say that, when I talk to you about narratives or the stories that we tell ourselves, does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, what comes up right away is just our self-talk, right?
Yep.
And whether or not we're listening to it or talking to it, right? And
Yep.
I think for a lot of us, most of the time we are listening to it instead of talking to it, and I think at the same time a lot of us aren't aware sometimes that the voice inside our head is not us, right?
Yes. Yep.
And coming to that awareness, coming to that conclusion is a major step to me in your personal growth and in your self-awareness. So that's what comes up right away.
Very cool. And that's something really interesting that I haven't necessarily thought about before, when you said the fact that a lot of us are listening to our self-talk and not talking to it. Can
Yes, sir.
you go into a little bit of like what you mean by that?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is simply, like you'll hear, for example, it's like, hey, I want to do this. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, no, we can't do that. Why would you do that? And for whatever reason, we listen to that voice.
Yeah.
When in reality, you should be like, okay, I hear you. And maybe, yes, you're right. This is why. However, now I'm like, but these are all the reasons that I can do it. Right. And just
Yep.
flipping and just being consciously willing to flip the narrative, to flip the script. Hey, I can't do that, as opposed to how can I make this happen, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. It
Um, yeah, go
it
on.
sounds to me almost like a gut check, like checking yourself, like checking that
Yes,
talk of, okay, is this actually what I think, or is this a story that I'm telling myself?
for sure, exactly that. And a lot of the time, that narrative is just based on our past, right? Our childhood coming up, our nervous system reacting to the situation, right? And
Yeah.
so basically in the past, if all you've ever heard is no, right, around a certain situation, your body, your self talk is going to tell you what? No, we can't do that. And it will find every reason why you can't do that,
Yeah.
right? Versus you
Yeah.
talking to it and be like, no, we can do that. Yes, we're not where we need to be. However, this is what can help us get to where we could be to execute. That's a
Yes.
different narrative. And that takes work. That takes you being aware of your thoughts. And it also takes you being aware that, hey, that voice sometimes is not the conscious being.
Yes. Yeah. And I really love that idea, and it's one that I've kind of dug into a lot recently. Is the idea that the voice in your head isn't actually yours, and that it's
Yes.
been put there by somebody else, and questioning that. And again, going back to what you said of talking to that self-talk, of questioning it, and really going through that process of figuring out where it came from. Is it actually you? Is it somebody else? Is it what you've been told your entire life, or is it based on how you're actually feeling, or your actual subjective opinions? So
100%,
I,
sir. 100%.
and so when I think of narratives that we tell ourselves, I think that everybody does it a little bit, at least.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so when I say that, in my mind I go to, for example, I tell myself that I am, a responsible and caring person.
Yep.
right? And there's millions of different descriptions of the narrative of like what kind of person you tell yourself, or how you tell yourself that you will react in certain situations. I'm good under pressure, I'm not good under pressure. I'm a leader, or I'm a follower, or I'm a team member. And just so many different narratives that really are personalized to every person.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the question that comes up is, what's the difference between the narratives that we tell ourselves and our identity? And so, yeah. And so when I say
Wow.
that, what comes up for you?
Dude, I don't even know where to start with that, dude.
Yeah,
That's a great question. Our narrative versus our identity. So, this is something that I'm learning for myself, and just realizing that, who you are up until this point is one thing. And if you don't like who that person is, you can change it, right?
okay,
So if your identity up until this point is, yeah, like, let's just say, like, I'm caring, I'm nurturing, I'm Mr. Nice Guy, da 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 da, right? And now your narrative is, for example, being like, no, you're not. These are all the reasons why, da 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 da, et cetera, right? In that moment, like, to me, like, this is the beautiful spot. In that moment, you get to consciously decide here, in 2020, who does Nuke want to be? Do I want to change this idea, or do I want to keep it? And the beautiful thing, there is no right answer, there is no wrong answer. It's just, what do you believe to be true at this point in time?
for sure.
And I think,
Because, yeah, go ahead.
and I think at the end of the day, as long as you're willing to do that consistently and consciously every moment of every day, then your narrative and your identity, you're always playing with, and like, it's malleable, and you can play with it and manipulate it and transform it and tweak it. Do you see what I'm saying? So
For
really,
sure.
your narrative, if you so choose, can be a healthy tool slash mechanism to help you in terms of recalibrating who you want to be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And so what I was going to say was, I totally agree on that, because, I think that what we tell ourselves is 90% of the truth,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so we decide how we want to show up, how we want to react, most of the time. And if we tell ourselves that, then that's usually how it's going to happen. Of course, there comes into it, our actual DNA of, are we capable of doing it? Of course, but 90% of it is just deciding that that's the way that we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, when I was thinking about this question of, a narrative as opposed to our identity, um, of course, they're very close and intertwined, and, very similar to what you were saying. But for me, when I was thinking about it, the distinction that I made was, that I feel narratives tend to be more rigid
Okay.
and more of a story,
Yep.
right? Of, this is the story that I tell myself, and so this is how I always have to show up.
Yes.
Right. But our identity is more of what makes us us, and our reasons for doing it, what drives us to be the way that we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and it making the distinction in my mind of, having the narrative that I'm a fun person,
Mm-hmm.
right? um but having an unhealthy view of that would be that no matter how I'm feeling, I need to be fun,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
But in my mind, if you take it more of an identity of, generally I am a fun person,
Mm-hmm.
most of the time that's how I'm going to show up. But knowing that that's a part of me, and part of me means that I'm not there 100% of the time. And sometimes I am going to feel, tired or stressed or angry, and I'm not going to be fun. And that's okay too, because it's a part of my identity. It's not a strict story that I need to adhere to at all times.
For sure. And Jared, like, to me, what's standing out here is you are consciously aware throughout the whole process. And that's the kicker, right? Because I think if you're not conscious, then yeah, then you can hear your narrative, and let's just say your narrative is shitty and it's like, I'm a bad person, I'm overweight, I can't do anything, da 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 da, and that's all you've heard all your whole life. Well, then of course,
Yep.
like that narrative is shitty, and that's what you live by. And as a
Yep.
default, and as a default, your identity then is somewhat wrapped up in that, and you're like, okay, that's true, I can't do anything. Versus on the latter, like if you're consciously aware and you hear that narrative, you're like, yeah, and I'm choosing to be proactive and I want to change that. And to me, that's what I'm learning is the kicker. Is this healthy, or I mean, is this conscious or unconscious? Right? Because
Yes.
because because unconscious is going back to your nervous system and is going back to the past and what have you. Versus if you're conscious, you're like, okay, I'm not defined by my past, and I get to decide and choose who I want to be in this moment. And to me, that is what is most important.
For sure. And just when you were talking there, what popped into my mind is, being the narrator of your own life.
Preach.
And, because you're the narrator, you decide what is said.
Exactly.
And so like that conscious decision.
Exactly, sir. So like just to clarify, for me, like your identity is fluid. And I agree with that in the sense of that you are able to shape that to be whatever you want. Versus your narrative is rigid when it's unconscious because it's based on the past, your previous experiences, and your nervous system, which are all beautiful.
Yes.
Which are all beautiful things. They're great. However, if you're allowing that to dictate who you want to be in this present moment, that can be a scary thing. Because then guess what? Neurologically, your pathways are going to be like, hey, don't form a new neural pathway. Let's keep to the same old ones. And sometimes those old shitty narratives can be ones that our parents have told us. And if our parents were shitty, then guess what? For the rest of your life, it's you're not good enough, you're not fast enough, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough. So then it's like, man, you're just stuck wallowing in the poop for your entire life. And then you wonder why people don't do anything great with their lives.
For sure. No, for sure. And that actually that leads into my, my next question, which
right.
you already touched on, which is good. But, like where, in your opinion, where you think narratives come from?
Oh, dude, it's all about your upbringing. It's all about your upbringing and your right. And you know what? Like again, like for like I get it. Like when you're growing up and you're a teenager and then you're an adult and what have you, like you have to be around, certain people, certain adults or people in responsibility, like in power, quote unquote, right? And you have to listen to them. However, the minute that you get to stand on your own 2 feet and you are an active contributing member of society, this is where you now, and I say this very intentionally, you now need to start being super intentional with your input habits and the people around you and your environment, because that is what is going to shape your narrative now. Right?
Yep.
And that's why they always say, like, hey, you want to grow, you want to mature, don't be the smartest one in the room. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because then guess what?
Yep.
You start getting around people that are smarter than you, that are more ahead of you. Guess what? The way they talk, the way they walk, the way they act, the way they treat people, right? By default, will start rubbing off on you.
For sure. Yeah. And for me, I completely agree. And I always go back to the nature versus nurture thing, right? And realizing that it's both.
Yep.
You can't have 100% one or the other. And so, naturally in your DNA, you might start out and you might have tendencies to be an optimistic person.
Yes, I agree.
Right?
I agree.
And, like say like your natural optimism level is an 8 out of 10, right? But if you're around pessimistic people that constantly bring you down your entire life, and that's all that you're told, then, it brings your level down. And maybe, now you live your life at a 6 out of 10 because other people people have brought you down, but then the inverse being true too. If you're around people that are even more optimistic or that are just as optimistic as you are, and they're always bringing you up and building you up, maybe you bring that optimism level to a 9 or a 10,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
But also again, realizing that it is a fluid thing as well.
Totally.
And just like you said, you can change that level by the simple, not a simple but not easy task of surrounding yourself with those kind of people.
For sure. For sure.
And I mean, we've already kind of touched on it in a little bit again, but that just what you think the relationship between the narratives that we tell ourselves, or our identities, and how that shows up in our self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
If you go a little bit more into that, because I know we talked about it at the beginning, but going deeper into that and how it sort of shapes that self-talk.
Yeah, I think everybody should have a self-talk sheet. That
Okay.
And this is coming out of like sports psych stuff, because I know, because this is the thing, when life happens, we all get, dare I say, negative, quote unquote, right? Or pessimistic. However, in that moment, coming out of it, it's like, hey, what are we telling ourselves? How are we talking to ourselves? And in those moments, it can be hard to get your head out of the clouds, out of the funk. So in that moment, I believe we all need that piece of paper that has positive, truth affirming quotes, sayings, affirmations that we believe about ourselves, so that we can pull ourselves out of that funk. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know, like, when I played sports, for example, when I played soccer and it was competitive, like, it was 3 words or 3 phrases, or whatever it was, that I would focus on whenever things got heated or I was emotional or whatever, right? And for example, it would be, hey, communicate, move your feet, pass the ball. Those are the 3 every single time. So when I got frustrated, that's what I went to. Move my feet, communicate, pass the ball. And it's in those moments where, hey, that's your anchor. That's where you come back, right? And when you're in a flow state, or all is well, guess what? I don't need to rely on those 3 so much. They just happen naturally. However, when it's a bad call, or we're losing, or I've just lost possession, hey, move your feet, communicate, pass the ball. Boom. Okay, we're back. We're back into alignment. So for me, that self-talk piece is your anchor point, is your beacon, is your boundary, so that when life happens, when your emotions are high, when people rub you the wrong way, you can come back to that and be like, oh yes, okay. I remember. I am positive. I am truth. I am love. I am uplifting. I go over and above for my friends and my family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. Like, almost having those pillars of self-talk that you can always come back to. And so, like you said, when your narrative turns negative, right? You're not in that flow state and you're having those negative narratives running through your head, you can always return to those pillars.
For sure.
To kind of knock you out of it.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. To knock you out of it.
I like that a lot too, because, I find that a lot of times those unhealthy narratives lead us to a lot of shoulds, right? I should do this. I should act this way. I should. And where, because you're saying I should, you're not necessarily acting, in your truth.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. You think that you should that way, instead of, actually, listening to yourself on what you want to do. And, that kind of leads me to my next thing of, your opinion on people putting too much pressure or being rigid in the narratives that they have for themselves. And so What do you think about that?
So for me, when it comes to people in their own narratives, what always comes up for me is, hey, like, you need to be aware of your past and what has brought you up to this point, right? One, and
Yep.
then two, your nervous system around that, because that is what's going to shape
Okay.
your self-talk, your narrative, right? And so if your past has been one of trauma, of hurt and pain, right? Well, your
Yeah.
narrative and your self-talk isn't going to be positive and uplifting, right? Unless you're consciously choosing that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
However, most
Yeah.
people, I unfortunately, aren't being conscious enough. So unfortunately, life happens and they're not, being the drivers of their vehicle. They're sitting in the back seat. You see what I'm saying? With their hands in the air,
Yeah.
being like, how come I'm not where I want to be? How come da 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 da? How come I've always finished last? And it's like, well, what's your self talk? Right? Because your self
Yeah.
talk is a reflection of who you are internally, right? And you only manifest
Yep.
what's on the inside, right? So to
Yep.
me, there needs to be this awakening and this awareness around, hey, if my self-talk isn't if my self-talk were a song, right? Or
Okay.
or someone else was saying it to me, would I listen to it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that's how it has to be.
Yeah.
That's how you have to treat it. Because, like, and I say this all the time to myself, man, my self-talk, I wouldn't allow anybody to talk to me like that. Do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And yet I listen to myself and I'm like, wow. And in those moments, I'm like, change it. You have to change it. Because then if not, once again, if it's within you and you're not dealing with it consciously, you better believe that your habits, your routines, the way you talk to people, the way you address people, the way you show up in your life, you will just manifest whatever's on the inside. Because it is very hard to do the opposite, right?
Yes.
It is very hard.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Kind of going back to that, what you said at the beginning of questioning that self
Yeah,
talk again, of would I, challenging it, of would I let anybody else talk to me this way? Would I talk about anybody else
exactly.
this way? Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so for me, when I was thinking about it, again, going back to, something similar that I said earlier of it becoming so
Mm-hmm.
rigid, right? And, not realizing that we are complex
Yep.
beings,
Yep.
right? And, our states, our mental, our physical, our spiritual states change
Yep.
constantly. And just because they're different in that moment does not necessarily mean that, our whole view of what they should be has
Mm-hmm.
changed. And, what I mean by that is, again, being rigid in that narrative of I have to or I should do things this
Yep.
way, right? And then going back to that narrative of, okay, so the narrative that I've told myself in my life is I need to be married by X. I need to have, I need to buy a house by X. I need to have this in my
Yep.
career by age X, right? And then, putting again, being like I said, being so rigid in that it's pass or
Mm-hmm.
fail. No, like is the narrative, and so I don't care if it's right for me, and I don't care if I should actually be doing something else at that time. I've told myself that that's when I'm going to do it. And so I'm going to do that no matter
Mm-hmm.
what, whether it's a person or the wrong job, or, the wrong time for me, because I told myself I have to achieve this by age X, I'm going to do it
Mm-hmm.
anyways. Yeah. And so, it's really interesting and why I love, you know, having a discussion about these
Mm-hmm.
topics with somebody else because so coming into this talk and when I when I had written up the questions, my last question was, can narratives be a good
Yeah.
thing? Which I've changed my
Yeah.
mind on, because through talking to you, in my mind before starting, narratives were unhealthy the way
Yeah.
that I saw them. But just through our conversation, it's actually changed my outlook on them, which is really
I
interesting.
love that.
You know, still having the distinction between narratives and
Mm-hmm.
identity, but there being healthy narratives and there being unhealthy
Exactly.
narratives.
Exactly. Right. And I would even add another layer to it and be
Yeah.
like, is this a conscious narrative or is this an unconscious narrative? Right. Because once again,
Yes.
it could be like, hey, you know, Jared is faced with a new challenge, and listen, the conscious narrative is like, yo, I can do this. Like new experience, new environment. Here we go, right? Unconscious Jared is
Yeah.
like, yo, dude, this is totally out of our comfort zone. What are you doing? We're not good at this. Like, abort,
Yeah.
delete, run. Do
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? And if and in that
Yep.
moment, to me, this is where the magic is. In that moment, what is Jared of 2020 going to decide? Are you going to choose the
Yeah.
conscious decision or the unconscious? And guess what? No one, not no one, either situation is wrong. It's just, hey, who do you want to be
Yeah.
in this moment? And I'll tell you something, dude. Sometimes the right decision is the unconscious decision, because because guess
Yes.
what? That is based out of, hey, we're keeping us safe, right? We're keeping us safe. We're
Yep.
keeping us out of danger and what have you. And then other times, guess what? That decision is actually the one that's going to hurt us. And yes, guess what? We may take a couple steps backwards and we will move forward. And next time we will course correct. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So to
Yep.
me, the narrative isn't the deciding factor. It's whether or not you are being conscious in that moment, right?
Yeah. No, I absolutely
Boom,
love that.
boom.
Being, even if you have an unhealthy narrative, if you're
Yes,
conscious about it, at least it gives you the opportunity to learn
boom.
from it and to understand and to
Yes,
grow.
right.
No, so I absolutely love
And
that.
dude, and I'll
Yeah.
tell you something. That's what people that are in like, and don't quote me on this word for word, but like guys and females that are in like the military or in police or in firefighting. It's like, hey, you train yourself on a on like a neurological level, on a nervous system level to make this decision making in a second. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
basically, it's a muscle. And so basically, you need to go through life, and in these split second decisions, because you've done it so many times, right? That now you know, hey,
Yep.
I know when I've gone too far to the left, and I know when I've gone too far to the right. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think a lot of people aren't willing
And
to do that work, right? They're just
for
always on the
sure.
left,
Oh,
and it's
for
like,
sure. Yeah.
well, that's just how I've always been. Mom and dad told me that. That's what my
Yeah.
girlfriend's always told me. So that's just, and it's like, no, dude, you get to decide in every moment, every decision that you make, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Is this bringing me to the next level?
Yes. Oh, for sure. And when you were saying that, like what came to mind was changing your
Boom.
instincts,
Yep.
right? Is that what, that's almost what they're doing, is so that instinctually they'll automatically make the right decision in that
Yep.
split second, where, they don't have to think
Yes.
about it, but they've consciously had to work to get there.
Yes. Love that. Instincts.
Right. Yeah.
Changing your instincts, dude. Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. Well said.
Yes. Thank you. Um, yeah. So no, I love that. And I'm really, like I said, I'm so glad that, having this
Mm.
conversation has expanded even how I think about it and what I came in. And, you know, again, try not to be rigid in that
Yeah.
mindset. So glad that I was able to actually practice what I
Yo,
preach a little
amen.
bit.
Amen, dude. Amen. I love that.
Awesome. Yeah, so that was all I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to say on the topic.
No, man, I really think you actually hit everything. And even for me, like even that last point about training your instincts, right? I think is powerful. And even now I'm trying to like wrap my head around like how can I do that in my life right now? So I just want to
Yeah.
commend you for that, like in that conversation we just had, because that was beautiful. So yeah, that was
Thank you.
good.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah. Wouldn't have
Hey
got there
man,
without you.
teamwork. That's what
So
we do, right?
awesome. Well, as always, it was my pleasure. And thanks so much for doing this. And can't wait till
Hey
our
Jared,
next
thanks
one.
for always having me, man. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Of
You too,
course. You
sir.
take care
Later.
now.